So we're going to start.
Yes,
Great.
I'm trying to live stream. I'm getting kind of an error on my end, but we are recording. So I will live stream on Facebook. Let's try that. All right, so it seems live streaming isn't quite working on my end, but we are recording and we'll post to social media later. So let's get started. All right.
Great.
Please.
So,
So I'm just going to give you a quick intro, Doreen. So thank you everyone for joining today's innovation seminar presented by the MedTech Talent Accelerator. I'm Jesse Ehrlich, Program Officer at McGill University, Department of Biomedical Engineering, and I will be your host this afternoon. So before we get started, I would like to give a land acknowledgement. McGill University is on land which has long served as a site of meeting and exchange among Indigenous peoples, including the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe nations. We acknowledge and thank the diverse Indigenous peoples whose presence marks this territory on which peoples of the world now gather. So today we are proud to be hosting Doreen Miao, Business Director of Ananda Devices, who will present a seminar on transitioning from PhD research to a business career in medical technology. Doreen has joined the pharmaceutical industry after completing a PhD in microbiology and immunology at McGill University. She has over 10 years of experience in various commercial functions within the pharma and biotech industries, including financial analytics, marketing, and sales. With her commercial expertise, she has successfully helped scale the commercialization of cutting-edge technologies, and Doreen is currently leading the commercial operations at Ananda Devices, which specializes in high-throughput organ-on-a-chip technology developments. And so after Doreen's presentation, we'll open up for Q&A as time allows. And so without further ado, Doreen, please take it away.
Great. Well, thank you so much for the introduction, Jesse. I am really excited to be here with everyone. And I hope this webinar of an hour is going to help some of you in transitioning from the PhD research, that the position that you're currently in, into somewhat of a more business-driven career in medical technology with some of my experience. So this is, I am hoping that this webinar is somewhat informal, just so that we don't have to sit through another one of these webinars where I talk and you listen. I was really hoping to make this a little bit more interactive. So, there are, what I had in mind for everybody is, I will elaborate a little bit about me in a somewhat self-centered way through a few different slides. And after that, potentially we'll go into some case studies and we will have more of an interactive session together to kind of understand a few different things that I would mention throughout my presentation. So based on Jesse's introduction, who I am. So Jesse did a wonderful job, but I just want to give you a little bit more context of who I am as a person. So I am a scientist at heart, and then that's something that I say on my CV as well for many, many, many years. At the end of the day, I am a scientist, and my life approach has always been experimental in some ways. Try it and see if it works. If it does, then move ahead. If it doesn't, then try something else. And I did have some basic business training while I was doing my PhD at Concordia University. Nothing fancy, more just a certificate program which has kind of one course that touches on each side of the business, pretty short courses. I am, at the end of the day, when we talk about commercialization of technology, essentially it's basically translating technology, which is something that's not well understood by people, business people, people who are not in technology, who are not in science, to terms that can be understood by a wider audience. And then that's essentially the process of commercialization. And that basically is the job that I do in various technology companies, which is come in, look at the technology and try to find a way to position it better, to say it better, to translate to people who can't understand the technical terms and to better understand this in order to buy into the technology that we're getting at. So I do have a very curious mind. So I am interested in a few different areas. And I do have a very good growth mindset, which have serviced me very well. Essentially, you are always looking at the reality that you are at and then trying to see where the next step would be, within the same company, within different companies, and from a skill development perspective as well. You know, I do have several different mentors that I consistently speak to, and different groups that I join to learn more from a personal development point of view, as well as different skill set development. I think more importantly, I am what I call the new term that I've coined, translating, is network collector. So one of the things that I've realized, especially through the development of my own career, is, you know, how important network is. I'm sure I'm not the first one saying it, and I personally have heard this time and time again from different webinars when I was making that transition. But it is really true, where most of the positions that I have obtained in the past, I have not applied by submitting CVs. A lot of it is basically having a coffee chat with people, you know, talking more about what they care about, talking more about their technology, really, you know, having a thought of your own about the direction that you're trying to go, and really, you know, network in that area. And that's something that have served me very well. And I hope that, you know, I could help in some ways if needed from the wide audience, and certainly happy to further elaborate on some of that. So this is me as a person. How did I get to Ananda Devices? So I did have my scientific training at McGill University, and some business training, as I mentioned, at Concordia in parallel to that. I always tell people that I lucked into my first job at Knight Therapeutics. So at the time I was at Concordia, actually studying getting some of these business training, and actually it was the career office at Concordia who helped refer me to Knight Therapeutics at the time, it was a very small company without carpets, with no cubicles, and I was the only scientist that joined the company at the earlier stage. And that, again, was through networking. I was talking to the office, and then they just so happens needing someone who had scientific training, who understands a little bit of business, and here I am. And 2.5 years later, I've learned a whole ton of everything that I know to date about financial analytics as well as product valuation. From there, I moved into kind of marketing and sales. I called that a self-directed rotation. So I tried different things. I tried marketing from an agency perspective. I worked on some of the largest brands in pharmaceuticals today, some of the most innovative brands in pharmaceutical developments. And then, you know, that was really quite exciting. It gave me a very good exposure on how people think through business problems, and what really at the end of the day is marketing and what is sales. And as I mentioned earlier, I think my conclusion up until this point is essentially the exercise of marketing and sales are two different parts of the translation exercise. Depending on the target, depending on the market, then you kind of translate what you have into what you needed it to be in order for people to be interested, in order to help them solve a problem, in order for them to buy into the technology. And from there, again, I networked into management positions at different companies. And now I'm directing the technology commercialization process in various MedTech companies. So with that, there are a lot of learning that I have throughout the career. And I think I'm one of the rare cases where I did rotate through a lot of different positions, a lot of different types of companies in the same space. Essentially, if you are trying to make this transition now from academia to industry, I can tell you the transition is really difficult, and you are not the only one that's seen this. Essentially, there are a lot of people who are trying to make this particular transition, and because, I mean, you're great because you all have the technical background. However, it's really about how you leverage your technical background and how you think about things differently, how you learn a different way of thinking. That's what is going to really differentiate you from kind of the rest of the pack. And so learning makes this transition slightly easier. So you're great for being here and being at other events like this. Essentially, you get a broader exposure of what the industry is like, and that will help you discuss these positions more in a very in a more educated fashion, right? So one of the examples that I always use is, when we apply to positions like project management means completely different things in even the different sectors of the industry. Something of project management in a CRO is not going to be the same as a project manager in a pharma company on the advertising side. So there are different ways also to get into it. So the more you learn, the more you understand the industry, the better you will have in terms of how to position yourself within that subsector, and really make it to the position that you want to get into. So I'm going to repeat myself here. Networking is key. Literally I really believe, coffee chat is a lot better than submitting 100 resumes, because through the coffee chat, you get to learn a lot about the people on the other side of the table, and you do get to genuinely be interested in their technology, and you will start developing some of your own thoughts about where do you want to be, right? A company is, a collection of different positions. There are some that are more technical driven, there are more that are more business driven, and the more you talk to the other person, the more you understand where they're coming from and what they do, the better it is for you to position yourself in terms of where you want to be and how technical or how business you want to be within your career development as well. So the last point I want to bring up is, a successful transition requires a mindset change. I didn't realize this until I am on the other side of, the interview table. When I'm looking at some of the resumes and looking at some of the interviewees, you start realizing, transition isn't necessarily I'm doing the same job while I was doing my PhD, and all of a sudden I'm doing the same job while I'm in the industry. It doesn't quite work like that, because the things that we care about is not necessarily the same, and the assumptions that we're making are not necessarily the same. So generally, that is in a nutshell my experiences so far until here. So I think there are two things I wanted to highlight is, if you're interested in commercialization, your biggest asset is your technology background, because someone who are technical can acquire the language of a business person. You can present yourself in a very business fashion. However, someone with a business background, it is very difficult for them to actually learn about the technical background that you already have and the technical training that you acquired through years and years and years of schooling. So you have, sometimes it doesn't seem like it, but just know that you have a lot of assets that you just need to now monetize in some way. So think of it as a advertising project of yourself. Think of how you would differentiate against other people. Think in the terms that if you're trying to make a commercial about yourself for a certain target, what would that commercial say, right? So all of these are something that you could use as general guidance on how to make that transition from your current more academic research position to more of a business and commercialization position, or just into the industry in general, right? So what kind of ads would you serve up to your audience in front of the TV watching you in order for them to make that change, in order for them to make that purchase at the end of the day? So before I get into the case study, I do want to take a quick pause and see if there are any questions for me up until this point, and then we'll kind of navigate through a quick case study just for the fun of it, and we'll have some more question periods later on in the webinar. No? All good? Okay, so this is going to take a little bit of interaction from your part. So you can't actually just sit there and sorry. Okay, sorry. Before we move into this, I'm gonna go back and answer that. I like that. How did you initiate coffee chat? So what I do usually is I would search up the company. I would look into their technology. I would, do the best that I could to understand what exactly that they do. And then I would look for people on LinkedIn. I hope you all have a LinkedIn account if you're, venturing into the industry. So I would go on LinkedIn to see who works at that particular company, and just email them to say I'm really interested in the technology. I generally have some thoughts about how I could help with my expertise. Sometimes you don't need to say that. You can just say that I'm looking to learn more about what you do and how you do it. And you'd be surprised how many people actually answer back. I mean, generally, I think I have a success rate of something like 80 to 90% in my collection of all the people that I've reached out to. There might be just one or two people ever that did not reach back out to me and schedule that coffee chat. Sometimes it may not be coffee, especially in the the post-pandemic situation. Sometimes it's a Zoom call, so people would be easily interested in getting on a Zoom call with you for 15 to 30 minutes. And the key here, though, is not necessarily at this chat to talk about yourself. It's to talk about what they're interested in, right? So it's all about this continued engagement. It's about you learning what they do, because at the end, everybody likes to talk about themselves. That's just a given. Okay, everybody loves to talk about themselves. When you give them the chance to talk about themselves, they generally want to elaborate more and give you a lot of information that you're not going to get on things like a website or things like a job posting. And with that kind of information is how you're able to go back and tailor your strategy, whether to further network and being referred to other people who may be hiring, or go back to revise your CV to actually apply to that job. And could you be successful applying to a job with just an interview 100%? But I think in MedTech and in pharmaceuticals, it's a little harder. You really have to understand what you're talking about. You really have to appear to be really on the ball with the technology and also with the position that you're applying to. And all the information that you're gathering helps with one thing, which is in the interview, this is about how I can help you with the problem that you're experiencing in your current company. And that should be your pitch in your interview at all times. So I have the technical skill sets. I can help you addressing some of the pain points that you have. And this is how I could do that. But you have to understand the pain point, which is what you're going to get at during your coffee chat. I hope that answers it. So how often would you follow up? I would say you could follow up as many times as you need. And I mean, not obviously bombarding people like every two days, but generally, as a rule of thumb, if you don't hear back in 2 weeks, let's say, you could certainly, follow up in 2 weeks and say, you know what, I would be really interested in getting this opportunity. And sometimes one thing I think it is really good is to give people off ramp. You can tell them, if you really don't have time, I understand completely that you're busy. And if you really don't have time, you could actually just tell me that you don't really have time. I would be more than happy to reach back out later on, or just give me a time when you would have time, maybe in 6 months or something like that. Don't make it seem so transactional, but then also give people the opportunity to say no to you instead of just waiting around for them to say yes. I think most people would be more than happy to at least tell you, I really don't want to talk to you, or I really don't have the time. because that kind of, if they really don't want to talk to you, at least you give them a chance to say no to you, and then they know you will probably not come back, at least within a short period of time. So I think that's a strategy that works fairly well in that scenario. Would a bachelor's degree in biochemistry be sufficient to get a job in the career? Yes, absolutely. So, I mean, for most things that we need on the commercialization side, you actually don't need an advanced scientific degree. I mean, it's great if you have one, and that is a great asset to have and a key asset to have. But with a bachelor's degree, you've acquired enough baseline technological understanding to work in the majority of the pharmaceutical and biotech business already. And you can certainly leverage that. And the starting point for someone with a bachelor's degree might not be exactly the same with people who have a PhD and master's, and then the interest might also not be the same. But you can certainly leverage that for your advantage, because not every position requires you to have a master's, and not every position requires you to have a PhD. And for those positions, even if you apply with a master's or a PhD, more likely than not, you're going to be filtered out because you overqualify. And yes, that is a thing, to overqualify for positions, because each company generally have a pay scale in terms of where the entry point is with a different set of educational qualification. So don't be discouraged. A bachelor's degree is more than enough for a transition into more kind of on the business side. If anything, it would be an advantage. A mechanical engineering PhD. So there are a lot of development actually in this side. I would be surprised if you did have any difficulty looking for something in this particular sector. So from as far as I can see, there are a lot of biotechs in Canada. There are a lot of biotechs also in the US. There are a lot of new technology companies that are going on, and even the larger pharma right now is expanding more and more into the space as well, in constructing different models, new models, to do things better in compound discovery, drug discovery. So essentially, again, look around. I mean, there are a lot of different companies. So Ananda Devices, I'm just going to put a plug in here. I'm trying to stay impartial, but we are hiring. We have currently 9 different positions open for hire. So if any of you, look onto our website and are interested in having a different chat, please feel free to email me, contact me. More than happy to connect with you. And in addition to that, there are a lot of different companies in Toronto that are hiring, and also in Montreal. So yeah. So medical science background along with clinical research certificates. Yes, there are different programs. I know at McGill University Health Center, there is specific training program for clinical research. So do that. And sometimes your starting point may not be the pharma company. There are a lot of CRO that does more or less, that does these kind of clinical research on behalf of pharma. And I've seen a lot of people using the CROs as a jumping board, or just staying within the CRO, depending on what you like, right? So so the certificate is great. Essentially, you just need to kind of figure out where you start. And my recommendation is, go look around for CROs and try to apply. And if you do want to be connected with pharma, just make sure that you're connecting to the right people. In pharma, there's medical, there's also the clinical, and there's also the commercial. Again, talk to people, because within each company, they have different divisions. So you really need to get in with one person and then try to get referrals throughout the company to the right people, if that answers your question. Yes, your certification. Let me just, your certification and technical competency is really the lowest barrier that you have in this transition, because generally we assume that by the point when you get a master's degree or when you get a PhD, you have enough technical understanding for the field that you're getting in, unless you're really looking like very specifically for a position that requires a very specific type of technical skills. But in general, most positions, your educational background is enough. And what people are really looking for is, you know, whether you have a business mindset if you're looking for something in the industry, and whether you're a good fit for the team. So those are the two things generally we look for in our interviews. So whatever certification you have is great. It is certainly going to be a differentiation factor for when you're looking for these jobs. But networking, again, coming back to networks and how you talk to people and whether you're able to empathize with them, whether you're able to engage with them long term, is likely going to be what helps you to succeed when everybody else, you know, all lined up together trying to strive for the same position. I'm going to stop the questions here and then move into a case study, because I think what I just talked about, you will see it fairly clearly, I think, through the case study. And again, I would highly encourage you to really participate. I mean, this is something that I've used in our interviews at Ananda Devices, but obviously there could be other case studies out there. And this is not about the science. I mean, if you don't understand half of what I'm saying here, no problem at all. It's really not about the science. It's more about how you think and what you care about in this particular case. So essentially, I'll give you a little bit of context. So what we're trying to hire, let's say, is it's a cell culture technician, right? So it's, you know, an entry position in the lab, but with a lot of potential to grow into, you know, a full scientist. For a study. It's the same thing with clinical study. You usually start with something smaller where you're more on the ground managing the day-to-day to something more higher up in terms of managing a whole study. So the same progression. And, you know, we have a client who basically approached us to do some research studies to evaluate the presence of this particular receptor on the surface of a type of cells. And essentially your position is to brief the team about how you need to set this up and provide what's necessary and really do the planning of it. And here are some specific, I guess, points that were provided. And I'm going to give you maybe like a minute or two. And then from that point on, feel free to, you know, type in what do you believe to be some of the important things that you would need to communicate with the team and how you would do that. I hope you're all actively thinking about this, writing things down. If you have any questions about the case study, if you want to clarify, please feel free to ask. More than happy to clarify kind of what any of these means if that's not exactly your background. Okay, we're ready. So everybody's ready to dive into this. So we have a comment where client needs objective, 100%. The client needs objective, and part of our job is to tell them that they need an objective of the study and we need the context. So now we're assuming that the business people have, you know, like figured this out, they talked about it, they have an objective, which is, we're looking for a target so then we can hit that target and cure some disease, which is great. And as a technician, how would you communicate that? Well, I guess, what would you communicate and how would you communicate that? Anything, anyone? Okay, so I think what I'll do is I'll give you a few scenarios that I have encountered with the same interview. So essentially, I've the answers to this in terms of what information. Okay, yeah, that's great. So we explain that we investigate the NSR with PCR technique. That's really great. And what else do we need to say? What else do you think is important in this case? I'm going to leave that up. Yes, time period and budget. That's great. What else? 100%. How the samples are collected. Anything else? Great. Timeline and milestones to reach before deadlines. Yeah, risk and management, 100%. Tools to measure success for each step. All of that is really great and great thoughts, and already clearly you have a baseline understanding of what we would look for. One thing that you have probably so far no one have suggested is people, right? Who will you need to communicate this information to? Who will be on your team? And what do they need to know? So each person have their own role within the industry. Very rarely you get to do the whole study all by yourself. And obviously, you're working within part of a bigger team. So different team members will need to know different information, and depending on what their role is, they need to be communicated differently. So I think that's really important. And in terms of how you communicate it, so in this case, what would you do in order to communicate that? Would it be a phone call? Would it be an email? How do you think you need to communicate with your team with this information? Exactly. So it could be, yes, everybody is onto the group meeting. Absolutely, a written briefing is wonderful. Email is also great. Anything in writing is always super important, because one thing that you always have to assume that when people take away information, they generally take away maybe 20 to 30% of it. And the rest, you just have to have the in writing, and then so that they can come back and refer to it. And your email needs to be tailored again to different roles of the different positions within the team, so then they get their piece of information without having to dive through this whole thing of a case. And you need to be really clear about that. And group meeting is great because then you get the team together to see how each part fits within each other's job realm, and you get everybody coordinated with the timeline, with the budget, and then you also get to listen, right? So one of the key part is to listen to what people have to say. Different colleagues have a different part of the information that you don't have. Some colleagues have, a fairly lax timeline. The other one have a fairly stringent timeline. And all of these are super important. At the end of the day, business are run by humans, and something that we miss when we're more on the science side is the people aspect of it. Essentially, any science that you do needs to be within a team and within a human environment at this point. So always keep that in mind. So I will give you a few examples of some of the not so great interviews I've had with attendees. And that tends to be what happens when you're having, I guess, when you haven't made that mindset change in terms of caring about what the business care about rather than the science. So we obviously, as scientific companies in MedTech industry, cares sincerely about science, and we care about integrity, we care about all of the things that academics care about. However, we're also putting a lot more emphasis on the business, the operations, and at the end of the day, the business needs to make money, so the profit margins. And essentially, I've had people come to me with the case study, explaining to me what technique that they believe is better other than PCR, where they would try to explain to me what a PCR technique is and how good they can do. And I see this actually quite often. However, what that shows me is that you care a whole lot about the science, and you're trying to explain to me and show me that you know the science. The mismatch here is that by the time when I'm talking to you about this particular case study, I already assume that you know the science, right? So anybody who's passing the interview, passing the CV screen, I assume that you already have the technical information, unless I am asking you specifically about, please explain to me how a PCR works in a step-to-step application, in which case I hope you can try to do that concisely. Otherwise, we generally assume that you're technically competent. That's why we're at this particular conversation now. And what we're looking to see is how you plan, how you structure, how you communicate, which is what you need within a team environment and what you need in order to grow within the company and grow within your role. And the information that we generally look for, and now that I've shared the case study, if you want to apply to our company, please feel free to do so, because I hope you all ace the interview and join us. Otherwise, essentially what we are looking to get out of you is really what's the overall plan for the experiment, essentially looking to see if you are able to see the plan from up top, and how many samples do you need, how many groups do you need to include, really about how you think through this scientifically, right? Whether you have that large scientific thinking of understanding, okay, well, these are the things that I need to do in order to get us to the destination. And what is the length of the turnaround? So it comes back to the timing, because we need to plan things out, equipment, as well as the people, human resources. How much does it cost? Everything ends up to be how much does it cost? How long does it take? That's the two things that we consistently say across different companies, different roles, and how many people will you need to get this done? So then we can make sure that we provide the proper support for you. And I think at the end of the day, that really, again, a lot of you already have touched on some of these things that I'm outlining here. So you're in a perfect position to make your transition even now. But just know that, you need to think about things a little differently. So science is very important, but we just basically already assume that you have the scientific basis. And now we just need to see how you would fit within industry environments. And that's generally the harder part to get to, and that's where a lot of the candidates do fail in the process of transition. So essentially change that mindset, go network, and I'm sure you will be more than fine in your transition. And sometimes it surprises you how fast this can go when you have the right tools and when you have the right skill sets. And that is all that I have for the day. If there are any additional questions, whether based on the case study or based on what we discussed today, feel free to type in the chat bar, and I'm more than happy to answer them.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Doreen. So now we'll open it up for Q&A. Do we have any questions from the audience? Please feel free to write in the chat or turn off your mic and ask away. All right, in the meantime, sure. Yeah. So I'll have a question that might be of use to everyone here. So, I noticed that networking is a very key aspect of furthering your career. So I'm wondering if you have any special tips for networking, and in particular, identifying those people to have a coffee chat with, and then how to reach out and actually get that scheduled.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. So essentially, the networking is never about you. This is not it's not about you making an introduction, you making a name for yourself. It's all about other people. This is really an information gather. There are two different things depending on the, I guess, situation. So essentially, your networking is about you gaining information from other people. So you try to ask as many questions as you possibly could. You ask about them, get them to elaborate about what they care about, what they're thinking, and what they do. And then with that information, then you can essentially take that back and integrate into what you're trying to do, where you're trying to get, and what you are trying to get at in a more interview kind of setting or in your CV. And in that way, it's the same. It's, I'm going to say the sales process is the same. Essentially, the first question that I always ask my client is, what do you need? And then they will tell me what they need. And then from that, I will then tailor my pitch to, okay, well, this is how I could help you solve your problem. And this is the exact same thing in networking. It's asking about what you need and what's your pain points, and how could I help make your life easier. And from that point on, when you start understanding some of these pain points, the challenges, then you can go back and propose, here, I have a solution to you. And in that way, you are going to have a much higher rate of success than just pushing you as the person, because everybody is trying to push themselves as a person that fits the role. But very few people actually take a step back to see, can I solve your problem for you? And then, so I think there was another, there are a lot of different questions. So let me just get back to the questions. Talk about the business certification. Yes, so Concordia did have, I'm sure all the university have a fairly basic certification. I think Ryerson have something similar. I've had applications coming through Ryerson University in kind of more of the business function. Essentially, it's a 5-course certification. You just touch on some of the basics: accounting, finance, organizational behavior, marketing, and I forgot what's the last one. You can probably choose one of the either sales or something else. It's not going to be the same as if you spent 2 years basically doing your MBA. However, for someone with a science background, it gets you the basic understanding of what business is and what generally, people care about business. Like, you can look at a financial spreadsheet and understand what is revenue, what is COGS. Like, you don't have to be able to do it yourself, but you have to be able to look at it and understand what people are talking about.
So just to follow up on that, Doreen, so did you do it concurrently with your PhD, and what was that like for you?
It's night classes, so usually it's in the evenings. The course load is, it's interesting because I keep saying there's no offense to any business majors here, but personally, I felt like after going through a lot of the science, the business courses, again, they're very, very, very basic. They really don't elaborate into a lot of the more complex business. Certainly, I won't be able to transition into a hedge fund manager all of a sudden with this certificate. But essentially, what I found was a lot of it is common sense, right? So it really gets you an understanding of people. So that comes back to the point I mentioned earlier. everybody have a lot of science training already. You understand the science, you understand the rationale, you understand how science is conducted. Now what you need is really that people side of things, that human side of things. So you really need to kind of try to gain that as much as possible, again, by networking, talking to people, understanding that, and also through some of these courses, try to understand how people behave and why a business becomes successful, so that you can use some of these verbiage in your discussions with these people that you're trying to reach out to as well.
Perfect.
So if you're trying to transit from science to financial analytics, what basic trainings or certificates in finance do you recommend? I've had friends who transitioned directly with no training and no certification at all, because at the end of the day, a lot of the deep tech financial analytics have more to do with science than to do with business numbers. Obviously, you need to understand the market. Again, you need that basic structure, and then that's something that you can go to get from Coursera. And in my days, there wasn't even Coursera at the time. You just kind of learn by reading different things. I remember I have a lot of very cool, colleagues when I was, studying, and then we were all really into kind of the stock market, and we would follow different stocks at the time in MedTech and try to figure out which one is going to go up, which one is go down, and then we would have, a portfolio just to test like a few dollars here and there and see, if we can predict some of that. A lot of it is what you're interested in, and if that's what you're interested in, just get into it, try it, and try to learn as much as you can from all the resources that are now currently available on the internet. And with that, I think that should be more than enough. And you don't necessarily always need training, but if you want to, there are a lot of certification programs that are fairly basic and it's not time consuming, so you can do that as well at the same time. Yes, the CV format is very much the same. Please keep it to one page. And try to be number driven. So this is one of the things that are really important. So make sure that I look at CV in the way, my own CV especially, in landscapes, right? So what is it that you're trying to say? What is your story? I am interested in hearing about all of your stories, but you need to be able to tell me on a piece of paper. You need to highlight to me what exactly is your proudest moment, and insert that number, because I can only quantify it. I can only understand you when I'm able to make comparable to what we understand, right? So if you have worked before in market research, how many accounts did you work in? How many interviews did you conduct? All of these are important. And what everybody is looking for is a successful candidate. You need to show that it doesn't even matter what you did, but you need to show the difference that you have made within the role that you had. So what is that one thing that you were really proud of, that one thing you want to highlight? And that's the thing that you need to literally bold and underline on your CV in this one page. So it could be publications, it could be, within, I've had candidates where within 5 years, I published 8 papers, and that's great. Write that. I don't need to know necessarily every single paper that you publish, so you don't need to, give me a whole list of it. But just knowing that you had 8 publications within 5 years, that's an accomplishment that you're proud of. And I already get to learn more about you as a person. So it's less about, again, it's less about the technical competency, but more about you as a person and how you are likely going to succeed within a business setting. I can't, so the general salary level, I can't give you a range, unfortunately, because that depends a lot on the educational background, and it depends a lot on your experiences as well. And also depends a lot on the company type, right? So there are some companies that are deep tech that you really, your skill set is one of the 5 people on this continent that have the same skill set. And obviously you're going to get a much higher position and pay in that particular sector and job position. And there are other positions that are slightly more general, but it really all depends on what you're trying to do and where you're at that point. But just one thing is, do not sell yourself short. Sometimes there's the feeling that I come from academia, have no experience in business. You do. I mean, you've done a lot of research. You have the technical background that most business don't have. Actually, 90% of the population does not have a science degree. And you're that 10% already. So don't sell yourself short. Sometimes if it's not a good match, it's a good thing. You look somewhere else. There are a lot of businesses, there are a lot of positions open, especially in today's market. Look around and see what you can get out of it. Sometimes you'd be surprised of where you can land and the cool things that you get to do. And keep an open mind. It doesn't mean that you have a science degree, you have to go into research either. There are so many different things that requires a basic science understanding. And there are a lot of different things that you can transition into. I have actually never done a LinkedIn certificate course, so I don't know. However, it's not about the certificate. Very rarely, the certificate is the thing that makes a difference. It's about what you know and what you can showcase. So it really depends. Make a plan of A to B, B being A being where I'm at and what I know, B being this is where I want to go and what I need to know in order to get there, and then chart out in the middle. It's about the information, it's about the content that you have, it's about the information that you know, rather than about having that certification in between, if that makes sense. It's about being able to talk about things in a very educated fashion, being able to talk about it, showing people that you know what you're talking about. Is there opportunities for growth in this field? Yes, absolutely. If you're in a smaller company, then you would be growing together with the company, going up and up and up. And if you're in a bigger company that are more structured, obviously you have a lot of opportunity to go up or go more kind of a lateral move as well between different fields, whether it's medical or commercial or in field or headquarter. There are a lot of growth specifically in this field and in biotech and medical tech in general. With the pandemic over the past 2 years, there is actually significant growth opportunities over the past 2 years in the sector. So this is a good time to be joining us. If you're interested, again, more than happy to further connect. And Ananda, we're hiring. So if anyone's available, very much interested in connecting. As an interviewer, I would like to get to know you more as a person. I just, at the end of the day, I would be working with you as a person, not a machine that can do things, right? So I want to know what your story is. It could be a successful story. It could be a not so successful story. It could be you've been the best of the best of the best everywhere. Or it could be I really struggled at one thing, but then, I came back at the other thing. And it's never really about, it's never really about the technical competency. It's really never about what you can do, because by the time when we get to interview, you already know that you can do certain things. What I do care about is how you would do it and how you would do it with other people that are in the team, how you would help solve a problem that I currently have, because that's exactly why I'm hiring. And that's kind of where you need to, beef up a little bit more. One of the things that I always recommend everybody do is a 30-second elevator pitch, right? How can you tell your life story in 30 seconds? It's not a very long time, but you need to basically really realize, these are the values that I can provide. This is the highlight of my story, and really structure that story and practice, practice, practice. So when we start talking to each other, I want to be able to get a general sense of you as a person within the first minute. And then that's literally where the decisions get made.
All right, so we are approaching the top of the hour. So, I hate to cut this short, but because this has been so interactive and so wonderful. So thank you, Doreen, really for sharing your knowledge and for sharing your advice with all of us. I'm sure it'll go a long way for everyone in attendance. So everyone, please join me for a virtual round of applause for Doreen Miao. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being here. And I really hope that we didn't waste this 1 hour for you to sit through this. And again, if you have any further questions, please feel free to connect. I am more than happy to help and donate my time to help anyone that might need.
Very much appreciated. And for everyone in attendance, if you haven't already, please follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter. The MedTech Talent Accelerator is now placing internships for the May to August cohort. So thank you, everyone, and wishing you a very nice rest of the day.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye now.